Yo, what's up? So I'm gonna be doing a tutorial today. I'm doing running. Um, I don't really do tutorials, but here you go. All right. So to get started, you're gonna want to set up your Explorer like I have here. Um, some of the names don't have to be exactly matching, but I'm only doing it like this so we can keep things organized. The first thing we're gonna do is we want to get data. So we want to have controls per player. So it's not just like globally stored. So we're gonna go ahead and get the data folder set up for each player that joins. And I'm sorry, we're actually in server storage. We are actually going to add a folder and call it player data. I mean, call it whatever, but I'm calling it player data just to keep things organized. Alright, so here is this. This is pretty much the setup. In this video, I'm not going to be doing the data store part. I'm sure you can figure that out on your own. If you do need help on it, you can go ahead and just DM me on Discord. For this next part, we are going to actually set up the key inputs. So detecting whenever the player press down on a key, or say if they were to press down, say on the mouse. I'm only going to set it up here for keyboard. There is a way to do it with if you want to bind mouse buttons too. I'm not going to be doing that in this video. This is pretty basic. Also, in controls, in your data template folder, you're going to want to make a string value, name it the name of your control, and also in the value, put the key that you want it to be, and make sure it is capital. Alright, so here, this is where we're detecting the inputs. So I'll go ahead and explain this part. For here, input began is basically is detecting when the key is pressed down. So it's basically like key down. So say if you were pressed W, input began would fire when the key goes down, and then when you lift up off the key, that's when input ended fires. Input, this first parameter right here, is going to give you the input, like the button that you pressed. So you could also get the input type, whether if it's a keyboard or a mouse button. We're not really going to check that because we are just using key code. And so if you do end up pressing a mouse button, instead of returning key code name, so instead of returning, say, the letter that you're expecting, if you do a mouse button, it's going to return unknown is what it's going to come up with. And unknown is, I mean, a mouse button isn't really a key on your keyboard. So that kind of explains it. Here, event. This is a game process event. So this is going to be checking if you are typing, or say if there's a proximity prompt and the key that you press activates the proximity prompt, it will not fire. This part right here will stop it. There's probably other situations that I'm currently not thinking of, but that's kind of the reason it's there. So now that we got the client part set up, we are going to go ahead and handle everything that happens on the server side. So we're going to go ahead and get the controls set up. And so one more thing, in data, I kind of forgot this, but I'm now realizing it. We're going to need a separate folder that we're going to call values. And in here, we are also going to make a value a boolean value, a bool value, and we're going to name that running. So this is the value we're going to change depending on, so we're going to change it on the server to detect when a player is running and when a player isn't running. And one more thing, just before, make sure these names are the same. This is important only because to prevent like writing a whole bunch of extra lines of code. As long as these line up, we can compare the control name to the value name, and we can assign properties easier that way. And sorry, I hate to keep adding stuff, but for this purpose, I'm going to make it easier for you guys to expand on. So in the controls folder in replicated storage, we're going to make a folder called modules. And we're going to add a module script, and we're going to go ahead and just call it control handler. And then here is actually where we're going to be storing pretty much all our controls. So for each control, we are going to want a detection for when you either press down on the key or when you let go of the key. In case for some reason of those controls you need to keep track of those specific inputs, it's going to be here for you. In our case, we're actually not going to be needing it, but it's going to be here just in case. Alright, we're coming close to the end. Here we're getting each of those two remotes that we created, one for when the input begins, one for when the input ends. And here we are requiring the module that we just made. Here on the input begin part, we are first getting the player's data because its controls are relative to the player. We are then finding the action specific to the key that we are pressing. So on the client, we are sending over the key code name, and that is what this is right here. And then here it is, we are passing it through this function that we have created called action finder. This takes two parameters, one being the player's data folder, and the second being the key code name that we are passing. It is then going to loop through all the controls that we have, compare the value of it. So in this case, for run, we have W. So if we press W, it's going to look for it. We have a check to make sure that what we are checking is actually a value. If not, then we are going to continue, which means go to the next kind of pair or next value or next object that we're searching for in the folder. Here, we're checking the control value, checking to make sure it's not equal to the key name. Instead of checking if the control value, which is here, this right here, is equal to control or equal to the key name, we could do that and we could put it in an if statement, and that would just make another nest of our code, which I personally find to be ugly. But instead we're going to do this because it keeps in our one line and basically checking if it's not equal to it, which means this is not the right one. So if it's not the right one, we're going to continue and look for one that is the right one. And in the case that it is the right one, which means the key matches the value given, then we're going to return the control name, which in this case will be run. So that finds the current action that we're looking for, which we are assigning to an action variable. Now, in the case that we press a key and there is no control for that key, it is not going to give us an action, which is what this if statement is here for. If there's not an action, here I put in a warn that say no action is binded to this key. If you don't like your output down here, which shows like debugs errors, or shows you errors, it shows you like print statements, all that stuff. If you don't like it being flooded, you should comment this out. And the way to comment something out is just 2 dashes. It'll turn gray, which means this code is not being seen, essentially. In this case, I am going to comment it out because I do not need it. But in the case you do, I would suggest leaving it. And then here, we're going to use our control handler variable that we assigned here, which is our module. We're going to look for the action. So if we go into the module, here it is called run. So it's going to do module run, which is, if we go back, it's going to be control handler, which is essentially the module part, action, which is the run, and the begin function. Go to the control handler, begin. So whenever we press down on the key, the correct key for run, it's going to fire this. It's going to go through all the checks, everything, and it's going to begin, or basically run this begin function for our run control. So now we have that. Let's go ahead and set up the logic for actually running. So here is basically our run code. I may have lied a little bit. We actually are going to use this end function. So whenever we let go of the key, here in this begin part, here, let's close it in. In this begin part, we are first getting the data from the player data folder in server storage, looking for the player name. You could put a check in here to make sure the player actually has a data folder before continuing, so no more errors occur. In this case, I'm just not going to do it because I know a data folder is going to be there. Then we get the character, and then we get the humanoid in the character. We then get the run bool value in our values. It's going to be right here. And then, since we are beginning it, we are setting the run value to true. Now, in your game, there are probably going to be other checks, say in a fighting game. If you're attacking, obviously you don't want to run while attacking. So you're going to have to put some more checks in here to make sure that you don't run when you're attacking. And those checks can just pretty much go right here. And then here, we are setting the run value to true. And then we are changing the humanoid's walk speed to make them run. This can also be a spot where you play the animation, although it is on the server, so it will be slightly delayed. If you don't care about that, I'd say just go right ahead and do it. If you do, there is going to have to be separate logic for animations. I'm not going to do that here because I'm not going to make an animation, but just a heads up. And in this run end section, it is essentially the exact same thing, except we are not doing a check here on line 11. I put a check to make sure that if we're already running, we don't start running again, in case there's some separate logic you put in here that you don't want to run twice. I'm not putting that part in the end simply because I just don't need it, and I honestly don't think you will either. Here we are setting the run value to false, and we are changing the walk speed back to normal. So I just caught this in here. There is a typo. If not controls is a value base, make sure that it's not with an S, it is control, because we want to be referring to this right here and not the folder. So now we're going to go ahead and test it just to make sure that everything is working properly. Here I want to make a double tap W to run, but in this case it is just going to fire at the press of one key, which is W. And if I use A, S, or D to move, obviously I'm walking at normal speed. But in the script, I set the walk speed to 32 when I press W. And as you can see, I'm moving way faster. Now if I let go of W, I go back to moving at normal speed. And so next, we're actually going to set up the double tap W to initiate the running. Now, because double tap W to run is has to do with controls, there are actually technically multiple ways we could do this. We could either add another value into our data named we would need another value in our data. If we want to do it on the server. Now, I do not want to do it on the server. I would like to keep it all client side, at least for detecting if you tap the key twice or not. I feel like that's kind of a better idea. So our controls code on the client is going to become a little more complicated, but I feel like that's okay because this is pretty much going to be the only control that we will need to do this with. Alright, so here is the finished code. Go ahead and explain what I did. The run key right here is just, I mean, it's our run key. It's the key that we're going to it's the key that we're going to tap twice in order to run. I have it down here in controls. Now, you could set up something in controls in here. You could add a remote function to invoke the server to get the control for the run key. In this case, since I want to keep it as simple as possible, if you wanted to add running into your game, I'm going to leave it like this. Previous tick is just, I'll explain kind of that later. And then allowed time, this is going to be the time between, or the time that you allow between key presses that gives you the time to run. So if you press it too slow, you are not going to run. But if you press both keys within 0.2 of 1 second, so that's a fifth of a second, then you will run. Here is when we check the key pressed. So if the key pressed is equal to run key, we then get the current time, which you could either use tick or time. Honestly, it doesn't matter. They're both going to have their inaccuracies. I'm just using tick here. Honestly, it's up to you. This value is current tick minus previous tick. So current tick is always going to be the bigger number than previous tick. This is always going to give you a positive value. And then we are going to set the previous tick to the current tick. So that way, we are going to get the previous time. So this is now going to be what we just clicked, like the time of our newest click. We are then going to compare this value. So this is the difference between our last time that we pressed the key and our new time that we pressed the key. So this number has to be less than the allowed time given. Otherwise, we're going to return, which means we are not going to fire our input being pressed. This allows it to where if it is under our allowed time, which is what we want to begin running, it is not going to return. And we don't need this line here. It is not going to return, and then it is actually going to get past here and fire this. And we are going to go ahead and test it to make sure I've done everything correctly. Okay, so if I just press W normally like I did last time, I'm still walking like normal. If I press W really fast, like twice really fast, we begin running. If I press it too slow, we don't run, which is exactly what we want. If I press it fast again, there we go, I'm now running. Now, in the case that you want to bind it to, say, a shift key, you can completely remove this logic that I just added, and it will work just fine as long as you go into over here into your server storage, into your data folder that you've created, and adjust the controls value. Now, if you were to say do something such as change it to shift, and you wanted to say, for some reason, double tap shift, when you change this control, the whole word does not have to be capitalized, so it won't be like this. It will only be the first letter, so it will be shift. Same way if you were to do it with, say, left control, because left control and right control are separate buttons. You would just make the first letters of each word capital, so it'd be left control, like such. And so that is the entire run logic. If you guys like this tutorial and you want me to do another one, doesn't have to be movement specific. I can do a completely different mechanic, up to you, just ask for it. Let me know in the comments, I'll make another one. Otherwise, I'll stick to my normal content and just upload the devlogs of the game I'm currently working on. I have created a Discord server, so all the code that I have typed in this video is going to be in that Discord in a separate channel, even with a screenshot of my Explorer to help set everything up for you. You or too lazy and you skip to the end of the video, which I understand, everything would be in that Discord. I'll see you guys later.